The Archdiocese of the Mother of God in Moscow and the creative group Ave Maria present The Cathedral, a century of love and tears.
The choir. The organ starts in one rhythm and the choir starts in a totally different one. It's all simple. The intro is not 2 in or 1.5. Please listen to the intro and begin in the right tempo. The children saw a notice here. Mom, let's go check. But I didn't want to. I was used to the way it was. Mom, why don't you want to? It's a church there. But I saw this church. It was all ruined. It was wounded.
It was more like some abandoned UFO from Mars. Simplistic Soviet architecture, crammed everywhere. It was in the 50s and 60s, dismal, grayish, and among them there were the decaying ruins of the church. It looked like an abandoned spacecraft indeed. It so happened that I was born not far from this place, and somewhere deep in my childhood memories I had this image of something big, brick reddish, which I often passed by in my stroller. It was somewhere right here.
Мама и папа были поляки.
Mom and Dad were Poles. I was born in Belarus. I came to Moscow when I was in the process of divorce. My husband had abandoned me and I was left alone with a child. I had no friends, no relatives. So how could I have survived without God? I decided to look for a Catholic church, but no matter who I asked, nobody was able to help me. I took the kid with me. He was only 18 months, and just wandered around the city. I was searching and searching and searching with no success. One church looked very much like a Catholic one, but it wasn't. I can't even express how disappointed I was. I began to cry. This church even had an iron crucifix on it. I wasn't even able to speak because of all the sobs and tears running. I came home with no church to go to, but my heart was still lighter because of the crucifix I had seen. On Sunday, I went outside and sat on a bench nearby, next to an elderly lady. She was with gray hair and a light scarf with embroidery on her head. I looked at this woman and asked her, "Are you by any chance a Catholic?" She replied, "Yes, I am." "Do you live nearby?" I asked. "You know where a Catholic church is around here, don't you?" "Yes. It's right in that very yard," she answered.
In those times, when the church was just being built, it was in the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, it took some time to finish it. It was a working district here at that time and not some wealthy part of town. Mostly Polish immigrants lived here. Many of them worked at the Moscow Smolensk Railroad Company. Right before the beginning of World War I, the flow of the refugees from the western provinces had increased, and most of them settled somewhere here in this district. So it is in this place that they decided to build an affiliated Catholic church. It was officially affiliated to Peter and Paul Church that was in the city center on Milutinsky Street, not far from the French Church of St. Louis. And here, in this diverse working area, they decided to build a new church dedicated to the Immaculate Conception of the Holy Virgin Mary. Building the church was not an easy process. It was built by a quite famous Moscow architect, a Pole by birth. His name was Tomasz Bogdanovich Dvorzecki, or Fama Osipovich, as the Russians used to call him. He was also well known because of a Catholic church he had built in Samara. According to the rules of that time, the construction committee, the initiative group, and the Catholic clergy had to acquire an official permit. It was an imperial permit, so the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Orthodox Church had to give their approval. According to the official permit, the church had to be without towers and without exterior statues. But in spite of the prohibition, we still got the towers. Moscow is not used to Gothic architecture, but nonetheless, Muscovites love Gothic. And they are fortunate. They have this wonderful cathedral which demonstrates the Gothic style in perfection. There's rich symbolism in its plan. There are architectural findings, interior design, and unforgettable sound of the forms themselves. The basilica has an oblong form, and thus it is called the ship of our salvation. The forebody is the apsis in which the altar is placed, and the people praying are on board the ship, which sails from the east to the west. So we have a so-called transept, and the structure begins to resemble a cross. There's also another symbolic image. It is possible to understand the plan of the church as a body of a man, a body of our Lord, crucified for us. The side doors of the transept represent the hands of the man crucified. The main aisle is the body and legs, and the apsis is the head. In such a symbolic image, it is obvious that the central part in our cathedral is covered by the dome. Is the place where we have the heart. In the cathedral, that is the place of the altar. And it's on the altar where the Holy Eucharist takes place.
Let's try it faster. The official dedication of the church and the first Mass were in 1911, and it was closed down, by another regime of course, in 1938. What can a historic research be built upon? It's mainly the study of artifacts, the history of the building. We have one photo of the original altar, which was destroyed after the church was closed down in 1938, and some fragmentary information from various sources.
Father Sergei Solovyov, who was a priest in this church in the second half of the 1920s, in one of his letters, dated 1925, wrote to his daughter about a Mass in the chapel of Our Lady of the Gate of Dawn, in the Church of the Immaculate Conception of the Holy Virgin Mary, which belonged to the Eastern Catholics. He writes that the temperatures were so low that even inside the cathedral they had to heat the communion cup using candles and then drink it with pieces of ice in it. We know that in 1926 the Easter Mass in the chapel of Our Lady of the Gate of Dawn was said by Father Leonid Fyodorov, the Exarch of the Russian Catholics, together with Father Sergei Solovyov. It was truly a celebration, an important event for everyone, and nothing similar has ever happened here since that day. Later, Father Mikhail Tsakul had to deny this small community of Eastern Catholics, led by Father Sergei Solovyov, the right to meet at this church, and they were not able to ever return there. Father Mikhail Tsakul became a hostage of the OGPU. He was always under extreme pressure, and of course it was his tragedy, a tragedy of a kind and brilliant man, but a man who was not able to resist the system on his own. His life was tragic. Several times, 5 times altogether, he was arrested, he was pressured. He gave written statements showing his willingness to cooperate with the KGB. He was released. It was clear that he was trying to do his best at not fulfilling these obligations given under the threats of execution, so he was pressured again and again. And this situation continued till his final 5th arrest, a death sentence and execution at Butovo shooting range near Moscow in 1938. So this early history of the cathedral from 1911 up till 1938 can be summed up as the times of trial, the first 27 years of life of the Church of the Immaculate Conception.
The trumpet seems to be a bit out of tune, or is it okay?
У нас посерединке, там, где скрипки стояли.
Once, when my son and I were about to go to the stadium, a friend of mine called, "Sveta, pray for me, pray now, I really need it. I can't pray for myself, you pray for me." And at that moment, in my heart, I so wanted to help him, and I addressed the Mother of God, saying, "Mary, save us, because who else can help us with such absolute love?" And my son, he was 5 then, came up to me and said, "Mom, look, there is a hand of Mary in the sky." He had been just playing and he didn't know about my thoughts, about the phone call. I raised my head and saw feathery clouds, looking just like fingers. I believe it wasn't some mysticism, but it was her invisible, unending help and God's providence that brought us to this church. How many years ago was that, Volodya? 20?
About 91, 92.
Back then, the cathedral was still in ruins, with birch trees growing on it, and the people had to gather outside, near the entrance. The cathedral was in a ruinous state. The towers had been demolished and the building was divided into 2 floors. In the basement there was lots of garbage and a warehouse of some sort. And on the 4 floors there was just space that was left for renting. A space in the center of Moscow, very convenient.
At first there was only one state organization, and then when perestroika began, They were shut down, and after that they began renting the facility out to different organizations.
There was a production of lamps for cafes and a wholesale alcohol outlet that used to move boxes with alcohol through the window on the third floor.
And why are you filming without permission?
But we do have the permission. The rain was destroying the walls, the roof was leaking.
The building was massive. It was obvious that it was in terrible condition. I remember a tree growing somewhere in the roof. Perhaps by its otherness in comparison to everything else surrounding it, the cathedral was doing its unique work. This church had its own mission, even when it was closed. And the exterior was absolutely out of this world, and it was not connected to anything that was happening inside it. When I saw this church and after that talked with some members of Dom Polski, they said that they would be interested in starting Mass there again. And they also thought of a possibility of performing organ music there in addition to regular service.
It was in the 1970s. Professor Alexander Fizetsky, who then was teaching at the Gniesin State Musical College, was the first one to suggest handing the church building over to the Ministry of Culture. This idea was not implemented mostly because of all the resistance of the organizations that were located in this building then.
It was difficult to try and do anything about them because there were so many of them. There were about 10 different companies in this building. Then some bureaucratic fuss started, but there was nothing to be done. These guys occupied the building firmly. As believers, we also appealed to God's help. The church is dedicated to the Immaculate Conception of the Holy Virgin Mary.
Father Tadeusz Picus had already arranged it, and Francesco Colasano, an apostolic nuncio, was already here, and on December the 8th, the dedication day, it was officially permitted to celebrate a Mass on the doorsteps of the church. It was extremely cold.
Monsignor Colasuono told me how it all went. When it was time to take communion, it was impossible to drink because the sacrament got frozen.
And yet, a lot of people came, especially the Polish community, the believers. There were about 700 or 800 people the first time. They came with candles, so it was an indescribable feeling for each one of us.
I took some holy water. The people started singing Blessed Mother. Everybody was crying. Many cried. The reading for the day was about the fall of Adam and Eve. I pointed to the church and said, "Look, when there is no God in this building, it becomes a ruin, as if it has no soul. And the same can happen to us. If we don't have God in our hearts, we become like ruins."
He was without gloves, without a hat. We worried about him so. While he was serving, of course he got sick after that.
When the Mass was over, even though it was freezing, no one was willing to go. On the contrary, more people were coming. Many were touching the bricks as if they were alive.
We were in occupation, we saw the war and all that. And here was this church that could be a witness of our lives. I cried about how deep we had fallen. I cried about our life turned into God knows what.
I was assigned to go to Moscow. I was then the first diplomatic representative of the Vatican in the Russian Federation. It was March. It was still cold. I had expected the winters in Russia to be cold, but not that cold. We had the Mass on the stairs, and the steps were half ruined as well as the church. There were also many things on the territory that had nothing to do with the church at all.
The second time we came there on the 3rd of March, 1991. There were very high poplars here, huge poplars. But on the other hand, everything that had been covered with snow was now revealed. Debris of rusty cars, tractors, old boxes.
There was so much old metal here. Various containers, cables, cable drums. So many things had to be cleared out. In June 1991, Archbishop Tadeusz Kondrusiewicz was already in Moscow. The parish of the Immaculate Conception was registered. It was clear that it would be the biggest Catholic church in Moscow, so it had to be the cathedral. And then the regular service started.
I was fortunate to be a godmother of a young lady who was the first one with her mother to be baptized on the steps of this cathedral.
It was Sunday, the weather was nice and the sky was clear. And at that moment, when I was supposed to pour water over the girl's head, out of the clear blue sky, there came raindrops falling. I can't explain it, but it touched everyone, deeply. In 1992, the decision had already been made about returning the building to the church, and the organizations occupying the building had to move out. But in spite of all the documents signed, the process was dragging. Many companies renting there simply decided to ignore the decision of the city authorities.
There was a whole group of us who used to come to the doorsteps and pray in front of the closed doors. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. we came here. First we went to the church in Lubyanka, and after that most of us headed here. We began to negotiate with the authorities, asking them to return the church. We wrote letters. There were big gates and a wooden house and a woman, the keeper, who guarded the territory and didn't let us through. Then she began to let us in. She let us come right here to this porch, and right here on this very spot there was a little table and the priest stood right here and later moved here. We also were here. Then there was the altar which was placed right here, and there some machinery was standing. On the first floor, some machinery was standing, higher than me, and it was actually functioning and destroying the building. We didn't even think it would ever be possible to reconstruct it. And the priest entered there and stood by the doors, and we had to stand between the machinery and pray.
There were different offices, people working, and they were not happy with us at all. On the other hand, there were people who welcomed us. The people won't let them pray.
The seminary was opened. Don Bernardo came here, and I was already working at the kitchen.
Russia is open to the kingdom of God. God loves Russia. He loves the world, and Russia definitely. In Russia, people want to get answers to the following questions. What is life? Why are we here? Who is God? What is religion? They are very profound questions. I am glad. I am very glad about it.
We were given a tiny room where Don Bernardo started the seminary.
The Catholic seminary Mary Queen of Apostles was re-established. Later it was moved to St. Petersburg, but many of the first seminary students began their studies here on the church doorsteps. In 1995 it all started with the realization that we were believers and that we needed a church.
There were already many people coming and praying, asking for the whole building to be returned to us. But of course, it wasn't easy at all to do it. We had the documents to get inside, but we couldn't. And when we had all the needed paperwork, the people gathered to pray. It was the 7th of March. They decided to enter the church and pray, and to make sure that the candles and the statue and the cross wouldn't be carried away, and all the rusted garbage they were carrying outside. There was a wall here. We started demolishing it. Right here, where there is an organ now, was the stage, and with some boards, so we had to clear it all. We explained we were doing the director a favor because we're clearing up the space so he won't have to do it. The director got these soldiers drunk, about 30 or 40 soldiers. There were many of them. And we went to the 4th floor where they had their communist propaganda room.
Then we barricaded ourselves in this room because the police came. We didn't want to let them in because we understood that they would just evict us.
We barricaded this door right here, locked it. The police came. They came from that side. I don't know how they managed to get in. There were about 15 of these seminary students. I'm not sure.
I saw their eyes, their inner strength. I thought they were just kids compared to me. But at that moment I understood what a child I was in my spiritual life compared to them. They were to me...
And Don Bernardo with Virgin Mary in front. Praying here and doing such things. It so happened that they got a little shower. I poured a bucket of water over their heads. Perhaps they thought it was something terrible. It wasn't holy water, just from the tube, and I had to lie down on the ground, and others were trying to protect me. Sister Maria Stetska was lying right on the concrete right there. I wasn't arrested, but I got into hospital for a few days. They were drunk. One man grabbed me. "And where do you think you are going?" And he added something indecent. I replied, "Come to your senses, son. I have 5 children like you. What are you doing? Think." He let hold of me. Don Bernardo was kept in prison till the evening, and Grzegorz Tyorach and 2 students stayed there till the next morning.
Of course, this was an act of despair on behalf of the believers. Some might say that they shouldn't have done it, that they should have waited. But I think that by waiting and waiting patiently, we might have come to a dead end. I think that it was the result of this event that the authorities could not possibly have ignored the situation any longer, and the mayor of Moscow, Yuri Lushkov, speeded up the process of relocating all the organizations out of this building. After that, we were able to begin the reconstruction of the church. In 1996, we were first able to officially enter the cathedral. The first floor, then the second one, later the third, all at its own time. Then we had to demolish everything inside, demolish and reconstruct the church the way it had been designed. We need to mention the workers, the Poles, who had been working here in different organizations, doing monuments renovations, working for Energopol, Budimex, members of Dom Polski.
A student of mine invited me here in the end of the 19th. I was working at school teaching English then. One of my students, she had been reading lots of Tolkien and become a Catholic. I know for certain that I didn't make it up, but it was as if I had received some special invitation and I was going in response to it. The choice was between St. Louis Church on Lubyanka and this one. I still go to St. Louis quite often. But here I come more often because there are more masses here, the adoration and the rosary. There are many answers that can be found in Virgin Mary, and she approaches us like our mother. The main battle is happening right here. It's here that we need to win and conquer. There would have been no World War II, no communism. So many things would not have happened if only we had won the battles in our hearts. Mary has shown us how to win these battles. and she's still showing it.
Сегодня я, епископ, которому верено попечение о душах католиков в европейской части России, приветствую тебя.
Today, I, a bishop who is entrusted with the souls of the Catholics in the European part of Russia, hailed you on the doorsteps of this church, where starting the summer of 1991 many people have prayed in all weather. I hail you, Mary, on the doorsteps of this church, where the first priest was ordained in the end of May of 1992. I hail you, Mary, on the doorsteps of this church, on which stood the people who carried in the statue of our Mother of Fatima, which had been brought from Fatima in 1991, and for the first time entered the church. Mary visited her home then, the home that should become the house of prayer, the house of God.
Мария посетила тогда свой дом, дом, который должен быть домом молитвы, домом Господним.
Люди жили именно тем, о чем говорила Божья Матерь Фатима.
The people were experiencing exactly what Mary Fatima had proclaimed, that Russia would convert. That process had started, and the people became participants of this process. So how can we not praise the one who has given us hope? The people were very receptive, and even many Russian Orthodox people came. It's clear that there is a strong connection between Fatima and Russia. The pilgrimage of the statue of Our Lady of Fatima 1996-97 was like a national retreat. And later in 1999 there was a pilgrimage of the relics of Saint Teresa of the Child Jesus and the Holy Face. Saint Teresa of Lisieux is the patron saint of Russia on behalf of the Catholic Church.
It was a time when the church started living its own life to the full.
In the beginning of the 90s, the structures of the Catholic Church were re-established in Russia. But this church has officially become a cathedral only starting 2002. The main feature of Gothic architecture that is widely recognized is the elevated vertical elements of the construction that create an effect of the building being more massive than it really is. And there is a very limited number of horizontal lines. The form of the columns does not create a horizontal line, as the heads of the columns are not on the same line. 10 columns represent the 10 commandments. In the Catholic architecture, especially in Gothic architecture, this number is permanent and is used most of the time.
When I first came here, there still were 4 floors. Later, in 2 years, when I came the second time to a concert, the cathedral was already open and reconstructed. And what impressed me the most was the atmosphere here, even more than the concert itself. I realized that this is my sacred territory, that I should become part of this church. I can be fully happy only here. In 1997, Archbishop Tadeusz Kondrusevich decided to establish a musical office. We have about 100 concerts happening here annually, and very often those concerts are sold out, which means that 1,100 people come to the performance. We know that God is waiting for them here. Many people begin their personal dialogue with God, their inner encounter with Him right here. It was 10 years ago. At first, I didn't want to go because I used to say that I was Russian Orthodox, even though I was an unbeliever. So, why did I need to go to Catholics? But then I came here out of mere curiosity and experienced conversion. It's impossible to describe it. It was something inner, and I understood that it is the truth, and that there is a God, and that He became man, and that He is present here now. So everything changed. Every day and even twice a day I started coming here.
Здесь я бываю каждый день. Всегда я бываю. Я прихожу утром.
I'm here regularly. I come for the early service and then stay for the second one, as there is no point of going home.
Не стоит. Я остаюсь на вторую.
And in the evening I come because of the Polish Mass.
Вечером я бегу, потому что первое на польском языке.
Воскресенье первое на польском языке.
On Sundays we start with a Mass in Polish, then in Russian, English, French, Spanish, Korean, Armenian and in Latin. 11 Masses every Sunday, so a lot of people come. In the beginning of the 90s, the Salesians of Don Bosco started celebrating Mass here, and they still do so. For a young Catholic, the oratory is the most effective way to start with.
I found the address in the phone book, and the first time I came here with my mother, just to have a look. And then I started coming to Mass on my own. And when I turned 18, I went to catechism. My parents were very against Catholicism because they said it's all different from the Orthodoxy. But I was so interested that I found the address on the internet and started asking how to come here.
Half of my life is connected with this cathedral.
Going to other churches, I feel as if visiting, but when I come here, it's like my home.
In the Russian language, the phrase that stands for cathedral sounds exactly like Ecclesia Dei, which means a gathering of people united by Christ. And a cathedral, or a cathedra, is the place from which the bishop addresses his flock. Let the risen Christ, the one who conquers sin and death, with his living presence now come into the lives of every Christian soul, every family, every community, and fill them all with his light. We all have our own mission, depending on how God created each of us. And in this is all the joy and peace of my ministry.
My daughter was 2 years old when we first came here. It was our Tonya who prayed so and loved to sing. Then we had Vitya, who is 14 now. And Andrusha, who is 11. After that, we had Margaritka, whom we adopted in Kostroma and brought here. And there is our Lana, running, who we also adopted 7 years ago. God is good. I always say there is nothing worth fearing other than sin. Come, Tanyuля, it's a pity we don't have a guitar.
Куда бы ты ни повел меня, Я исполню все, для чего ты меня призвал. Моя радость в тебе, всю свою жизнь я тебе отдам. Мои слезы и боль поглотила твоя любовь.
Бывает так, что после дня напряженной работы выхожу...
Sometimes after a whole day of intense work, I walk outside and I have no energy left for anything. And then I look at the cathedral in its quiet evening lighting and thank God for being able to serve Him in such a beautiful way.
За то, что имею возможность служить Богу таким красивым образом.
Once I'm going to church and thinking, Lord, if there is no church, what would be with all of us? What would we do? Who would we be? That would be frightening. Even to imagine it is frightening.
Пешком тяжело ходить, надо...
It's difficult to walk around here. A bicycle is better. It's a big church.
I see you're riding.
Yes, yes, let's go riding.
Producer Kirill Gorbunov. Director Natalia Kandudina. Camera Andrei Kiselov. Composer Anna Vitlugina. Translation Olga Sukhareva. English voices Alexander Wiesenberg and Olga Sukhareva.